Wild Fox, a true story by Cherie Mason. Illustrations by Jo Ellen McAllister Stemmen. Readings, art, photography, video are contributions from our community, young and old.
Lucky for all of us. In 1982, Cherie Mason and her husband Ken moved from a remote island in the boundary waters of Minnesota to another island, not so remote, in Penobscot Bay. They moved to Deer Isle. Advertising executive, working in radio, film, television, and later on the stage, philanthropist, activist. Cherie lives now at Parker Ridge in Blue Hill. This is a true story about something that happened to her.
Of a wild red fox? I have. Here's how it happened. I live on Deer Isle off the coast of Maine. Red foxes also live on the island, but it's not often that you get to see one. So it was a happy surprise one summer day to find a fox pup sitting in the middle of my strawberries, calmly chomping, looking right at me. I called softly, "Hi there, and what do you think you're doing?" The little fox continued nibbling, dipped down for another juicy berry, and trotted off. There was something about his face that stuck in my mind. 6 months later, when that berry patch was buried under dazzling February snow, I happened to look out my kitchen window and was totally startled to see what looked like a broad orange crayon mark against the white. It was a lean red fox standing on his hind legs, reaching up toward a hanging birch log studded with suet for the woodpeckers. Of course, I was delighted to see a wild animal out in the open during the daytime, but as I looked more closely, I winced. The fox's right front leg was nearly severed above the small black foot. I had seen steel jaw leg-hole traps, but this was the first time I had seen their cruel work. Inch by inch, hour after hour, this poor young fox must have struggled to wrench his leg from the powerful grip of a trap. Some chicken for our dinner lay defrosting on the kitchen counter. Quickly I grabbed a drumstick and ran outside. The fox bounded off in a three-legged hobble, so I put the food down on the ground and went back into the house to watch. After about 10 minutes, he cautiously returned, devoured the chicken, and limped off into the woods. Seeing his inquisitive, handsome face reminded me of the summer pup. I was pretty sure that this was the same fox. I waited and watched all day for him to return, but darkness came and no fox.
The next morning, when I made my usual trip to fill the bird feeders with a bucket of sunflower seeds, I sensed someone behind me. I turned slowly. There was the fox, crouching low to make myself shorter and smaller and maybe less frightening. I spoke to him in a soft voice of my sympathy and concern. But that seemed to make him nervous, so I backed away. He waited, watching me steadily with his bright eyes. Holding my breath and moving in slow motion, I went inside for more chicken. Back out I came, put down the food, and carefully moved away. After a few starts and stops, the fox approached and ate. He held his hurt leg high off the ground, and I could see the bare bone that connected the foot to the leg. I imagined his pain. A couple of days went by without another visit from the fox. I worried that his leg had become infected. Maybe he'd been run over. Winter was at its most bitter now, and the wind howled around the corners of our snug house. Then, very early one morning, as I looked from the bedroom window to see why the crows were making such a racket, there he was. As soon as I saw him, I realized how much I'd missed him. Flying down the stairs, I grabbed some fox food and ran outside in the icy weather. not even caring that I was still in my pajamas. Every morning for the next few days, it was the same. The fox would wait under the suet log until I appeared with the chicken and a few kind words. He would always hang back until I left, and then gulp down the free meal and hobble off. Was it my imagination, or did he look stronger? I wondered whether I should be doing more to help him. I phoned a biologist friend who said I was right to be putting out food to help the fox regain his strength, but he warned me not to get too close because any animal in pain is unpredictable. One morning, I saw that the dangling foot was gone. He'd probably bitten it off.
I now kept a special bag of chicken legs and various leftovers in the fridge just for the fox. I started to read everything I could about foxes, and I learned that they are amazing animals. For example, they've been around for 30 million years, 10 times longer than humans, and they inhabit almost every corner of the world. When they want to, red foxes can run up to 30 miles an hour, and their hearing is so keen that they can locate a tiny mouse under 2 feet of snow.
14 drumsticks later, the fox had become such a part of my life that I decided to give him a name. Vixen is the word for a female fox, and even though he was a male, I thought Vicky suited this shy, delicate animal perfectly. Not that Vicky cared, although I used his name over and over. He never seemed to get the idea. Like all red foxes, Vicky had smart black ears, amber eyes, and a long, sensitive nose. Foxes use their noses to dig with, and for Vicky, who no longer could dig with his 2 front feet, his nose was a real lifesaver.
Vicky was about the size of a small dog. I guessed that he weighed no more than 15 pounds. What really made him stand out was his glorious tail, almost as long as his body and ending in a white tip. American Indians believe the tip is white because it sweeps through the deep snow, erasing the fox's tracks. This great tail makes even the coldest night bearable because a fox can simply curl up out of the wind and wrap that warm, fluffy plume over its face.
Vicky had been coming every day for over 2 weeks on some secret schedule, but he was edgy and always kept one eye on the forest road as he ate. I looked where he looked, but I couldn't see anything. About this time, he began to tolerate my presence. I didn't have to leave after bringing out his food. Each day, I was able to get just a bit closer by sometimes crouching or sometimes simply sitting quietly on the grass. Finally, after about a week of this, I got so close, I'd hold out a choice snack to see if he'd take it from my hand. He wanted to, I know. I could see him strain against the instinctive fear that held him on an invisible leash, but he could not ignore the warnings deep in his bones. Spring seems to arrive in Maine overnight, as though the crocuses had been blooming under the snow all winter and were just waiting for the warm sun to roll back the covers. Each day the earth blossomed with more and more color. In comic contrast, Vicky's spectacular flame red fur became duller and drabber as he shed his winter coat until he turned into a scruffy little collie you wouldn't look at twice. By April, the news was out about the tame 3-legged fox down at the Masons. The UPS driver nearly hit a tree the first time he saw a fox lying in our driveway. Neighbors dropped by for a look, and an artist friend came to make some sketches. Vicky became a celebrity. The fact that he didn't run away from all this attention charmed his audience.
I see Daddy.
But it began to bother me. Had he lost his healthy fear of humans? Had I harmed him by teaching him to be so trusting? I tried to ignore him, even tried to chase him away. But he would tilt his head, study me with those golden eyes, and I was a goner.
It was May. The stump of Vicky's leg had healed completely, and he certainly acted fit, often putting on quite a show. One trick was to leap to a tremendous height and come down on a real or imagined mouse. He would pounce again and again, and finally flop absolutely flat out from tail tip to muzzle. One day, he arrived limping more than usual. There was a nasty gash like a bite on his left flank. Vicky defending his territory, Vicky competing for a mate. Not too many days later, to my amazement, 2 larger red foxes slowly came out of the woods, stopped at the bird feeders to cage a few fallen seeds, and swiftly went off again. And then, on a quiet afternoon, out of the blue, another fox appeared and coaxed Vicky to play. The 2 of them jumped in the air, nose to nose, and then fell back into mock chases. The fact that Vicky had only 3 feet didn't seem to dampen his enthusiasm, and it didn't look as though the other fox minded a bit that he or she was playing with the crippled companion. For half an hour they romped, the visiting fox mimicking every move Vicky made. Later, I watched them both down in the cove, jumping and chasing along the beach as their tawny coats blurred in the setting sun.
I had even more to think about. Perhaps Vicky had found a mate. Remembering that foxes use burrows or natural gullies for dens, I decided to show him a small, well-concealed cave I had discovered. I thought it might come in handy for future fathering, since I'd learned that male foxes share it in raising the pups. Knowing how he loved peanuts in the show, I took a handful and made a peanut path to tempt him down a steep, mossy trail to the perfect fox nursery. When we got there, I continued talking softly, trying to get him to examine the den for himself. Instead, he grew suspicious, then puzzled, and finally bored. He trotted off, leaving me standing there, feeling quite silly.
There was a lot about Vicky that reminded me of a cat we once had. Indeed, I had read that foxes are more like cats than dogs. They have cat-like whiskers, their teeth are long and sharp. They stalk their prey belly down, like a cat. And when they're angry or threatened, they arch their backs and make their fur stand on end. Even the pupils of a red fox's eyes are shaped like a cat's, maybe the better to see in the dark. And finally, newborn foxes are often referred to as kits, even though they belong to the canid or dog family.
During the peaceful days of early summer, Vicky would curl up under a big spruce, watching the horse and the bird feeders, sometimes dropping off into a quick snooze while a flock of mourning doves kept a safe distance. He would rather lie down than stand.
It seemed maybe his 3 good legs were still not used to the extra weight. It got so that I hated to leave for the mail or groceries because it meant leaving him. Twice I came home in the car to find him, lying against the garage door. I just waited. Whenever I took a pail of scraps to the compost bin, Vicky would tag along in a half trot, half limp, a safe distance behind me, and when I put in raised garden beds for potatoes, he treated them as beds indeed, rolling around in the loam for a refreshing dirt bath. When I stopped to do a bit of weeding, this wild fox would stretch out on the grass not far away, completely relaxed with his back to me. I had never before seen a wild animal do such a thing.
Sometimes he'd hang around most of the day, while on other days he'd appear about 5 o'clock just to look things over. As dusk fell, he always disappeared into the evening shadows. I wondered where he spent the nights. The answer came late one starry evening when I went outside for a flashlight to check the herbs for slugs. Suddenly and silently, Vicky came out of the darkness to see what I was up to. A few nights later, when a group of us was out watching the rippling pink and lavender curtains of the Northern Lights, who should appear to perform his whole bag of tricks, from mouse leap to full somersault. It is said that red foxes will eat almost anything. They relish little meadow voles most of all. Then come field mice, grasshoppers, and other insects, frogs, snakes, rabbits, squirrels, and every berry that grows. Like all predators, foxes have to take what they can get, alive or dead.
Vicky's menu, of course, was another matter. He finally came right up to the kitchen screen door and looked in. Once he figured out that this was where his adored blueberry muffins, Swiss cheese, and sometimes even leftover lobster came from. He would chomp on these treats with eyes closed and nose pointed heavenward in total ecstasy. At first, I worried he wouldn't be able to capture his own food again, until I watched him, in the blink of an eye, grab a fearless, foolish squirrel that had come too close. Another time, I caught the last inch of a mouse tail as it disappeared under his nose. He was still very much a wild fox. That made what was about to happen doubly exciting. It was a fine summer day. I had washed my hair, and I was sitting out in the sun to let it dry. Vicky was nearby. Without thinking, I held out a peanut that I had in my pocket, as I had done so many times before to no effect. He hobbled over to me and took it. He took it from my hand. He took it gently, with no snapping or snatching. The small, sharp teeth barely brushed my fingers. Suddenly, our eyes were inches apart, each face studying the other. It was at that moment that I dared to stroke his small, slender nose. It was just for an instant, but the thrill of that touch charged through me. Then, in late August, everything seemed to change. Vicky was gone for a few days, and when he emerged from the woods the next time, his attitude was all business. His coat had turned back to reddish orange and grown thick again, his tail once more a luxuriant flag. His long, thin legs looked like ink black boots, making the shorter one less conspicuous. Amid all this splendor, I saw a fresh, raw wound on his neck where the fur was torn away. Now, as in the beginning, he ate in big gulps, darting nervous glances toward the road.
We had come full circle. I realized that in all of our months together, I had never heard Vicky's voice. The typical yaps, howls, barks, screeches, and yells of red foxes did not sound here. Vicky was both silent and solitary. Then he was gone again for 3 endless weeks. I imagined every kind of accident or injury until my biologist friend explained that after their first year, male foxes leave their birthplace to establish their own territory, which can be miles away. Vicky's time had come. I sadly accepted the fact that I would never see him again. But then, on one of the ripest days in late September, when puffs of fireweed seed floated on the air, and the North Atlantic was as still as a great pond, there he was. I was so overjoyed that I stumbled over my own feet in my rush to get him something to eat. But for the first time since I'd known him, Vicky turned up his nose at a handout, and a blueberry muffin at that. Good, I said. You like what you can catch much better. He didn't need me anymore. Vicky wouldn't settle down and was obviously fearful of something in the direction of the road. So this time I followed him as he trotted on his 3 good legs to the other side of the house. There he lay down in his fox curl, not more than 6 feet away from me. I sat on the doorstep and told him how much I'd loved his visits. I told him how he must not think that all humans were on his side, and most important, I warned him to be very, very careful during the long and dangerous fur trapping season ahead. I told him other things too. After a bit, my gentle friend slowly got up and without a backward look, limped out of sight. I sat for a long time. The name for fox in French folklore is renard, which means unconquerable through his cleverness. Maybe it is so, my Vicky, I whispered.
Tail,